So the idea for this talk, the wisdom of the outsider and the insider, comes from a conversation that my classmates and I had with our world religions professor. And I can never remember what I've shared here before. Excuse me if you've heard it before. We were asking him what he considered, what Eastern religion had the biggest impact in America. And of course, we're all thinking Hinduism or Buddhism, which has had more impact. So he completely shocked all of us when he said Taoism. I'm like, Taoism? People don't know about Taoism. And he said, well, that's what they teach in all the martial arts. And he said, you have Christians, you have agnostics and atheists. They're all learning about this flow of how things move, and through Tai Chi. And you actually really learn it through yoga, like the whole flow of energy. And Qigong, all of it is accessing this energy. But people don't know they're learning about this very deep philosophy through all these physical activities. And he said the difference, he said there's feminine energy and masculine energy do things differently. So he said masculine energy comes to the front door of the house and announces itself. And it says, this is who we are and this is what we teach. He said feminine energy comes in through the back door, nobody knows it's there, and it fills the entire house. And that's what he was saying, Taoism. It came in through the back door. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't say you're now learning the philosophy of Taoism. But people are learning it throughout our entire country and not realizing they're learning it. And I thought, wow, that's really profound. And I've thought a lot about that because in this spiritual but not religious world, most of the communities are primarily women. Most of our ministers, I can't speak for all teachings, but I've heard even traditionally, Harvard Divinity School, Yale Divinity School are becoming predominantly women. I could say for Centers for Spiritual Living, most of the ministers are women. And yet, what's interesting is most of the books are still written by men. Most of the books in terms of percentage-wise, the amount of men leaders, spiritual but not religious leaders, compared to the women, is far outnumbered. I mean, with the amount of women, you would think most of the main spiritual teachers would be women. So I've always wondered about that. I'm like, well, wow. Even in this very progressive, spiritually evolved, lots of women ministers, lots of women community, and yet still the men rise to the top, so to speak. But maybe it's that they just come in through the front door. They're being men. And women don't always, maybe our job isn't to come through the front door. Maybe what we're doing is coming in through the back door, because it's easy to say, here's a teaching, but who's going to live it? It's that nurturing mother energy saying, this is how we sustain it. That's why it fills the whole house. This is how we live it day in and day out. You don't see all the work that we're doing in our spiritual communities, in our homes, but it's filling the home. I know in my home, I grew up sort of in a traditional home where my father was definitely the primary guy, the money earner, the authority, but there's no question that my mom's energy filled the home and impacted her children. That's why when you go to therapy, you always end up talking about your mom. Because that's the one who's intimate with you. It's what's going on, but not necessarily the visible one. And that's what got me also thinking about this whole idea of insider and outsider. Because for me, as I started thinking about it, the insider is that which we see as visible. The insider is that thing that we look at and everyone says, oh, that's where it's at. That's where the truth is. And the outsider is sort of invisible. It's that which you don't see, but does it have power? And what I look at is I think that inside or outside is such a inherent part of our dynamic and just being on this planet Earth, and will continue to be for decades to come. I don't think it's going anywhere. So it's good to just become aware of it and consciously talk about it. I mean, I remember even as a kid, my mom pointing out, I was in 3rd or 4th grade, and she said, do you notice there's always that group of people, and then there's a bunch of people who want to be around them? She said they tend to create a little clique, and that they are sort of the center focus, and then everyone wants to be near them. And I would just sit there and watch. I'm like, oh my gosh, she's right. They just all follow them everywhere. And I'm like, I'm not part of that group. So I immediately identified with the outsider because I didn't want to be part of that world, but I became conscious of it. So as I mentioned in my email newsletter, that I think we tend to have a worldview which we identify with more, but we can have both. So I think I personally have always leaned more towards the outsider perspective than the insider perspective. And it could be for many reasons. One might be that I was the only girl with 3 brothers and lived in a neighborhood with a lot of boys. So I was always around a lot of boys. So maybe that might have something to do with it. Who knows? But I want to but both have their wisdom. And what we want to get away from is that one is better than the other. Because first of all, we all have both. We've all been insiders and maybe insiders now. We've all been outsiders, maybe outsiders now. We can go back and forth in a day. In our family, we're one thing. In our job, we're another thing. With our friends, we're another thing. In our world, we're another thing. So it's not any one thing. So let's look at the wisdom that each offer and the illusion. So I would say I had 2 main experiences of being on an insider position. And so the first one was when I was I was 18 years old and I was a debutante. Now, growing up, we were always invited to join clubs and organizations, and my parents never would because they were exclusive, and that was against their value system. But when I was 18, my mom said, I want you to be a debutante, even though it was an exclusive group. And my brothers rebelled. They're all like, what's going on? Why? This is so against our values. And she said something. She said, I just want you to know that you have a choice. You don't have to, this may not be the world you want to operate in, but you always have that choice. So I never took it seriously. 18, I did the whole debutante thing. And of course, I invited all the people who don't belong in that organization as my friends and my date. He's Catholic and Jewish. But I remember it was this moment. It was after we walked down the stairs, and my friend who was Jewish, I just remember that, those moments, those picture moments, we were walking, and she said, gosh, I'm so jealous. I wish I could be part of this group. And I remember being shocked. I'm like, why would you ever want to be part of this group? It does nothing. It's completely ridiculous. And it was a group that would never accept you because you're Jewish. And I just thought, I was just appalled that would be something that she would want. But I recognized in that moment that that's exactly why I finally got why my mom wanted me to do it, because my mom was born, quote unquote, on the wrong side of the tracks in a poor family. And I think she always felt excluded from it. So she just wanted to say, you have that option. You can do with it what you will, but I don't ever want you to feel excluded. And it was the greatest thing, because the thing I knew, so here was my first wisdom about being in the insider group. It's an illusion. There's nothing there. The thing that people are grasping at and thinking, I'll have something now, you have nothing. It's just more life, more people, just what, I don't know, so I was grateful. I was grateful that I had that. Like, it wasn't something I was striving or reaching after. I remember Matt Damon, I was listening to him in an interview, I don't know what point of his life, but he was talking about when he won his first Oscar in his 20s. And has anyone ever heard him tell this story? It's really quite moving about how amazing, all the energy coming at him, and him going home with his girlfriend, and she went to sleep. And he said, I was looking at that Oscar, and he said, I was so grateful because I realized it was nothing. And what if I'd spent the next 20, 40 years of my career chasing that statue and thinking that it was something, and then be 80 years old and get it and realize, boy, I've been chasing an illusion all my life. He said, now I know it's an illusion. I don't waste my time on it. I mean, that's what the gift of the insider is. I was listening to, they had a whole a montage. I don't know if anyone saw it on Facebook. It was a bunch of celebrities. It was one of those Upworthy things. And they were all saying, celebrity's an illusion. If you think you're going to be happier or more fulfilled, or it's going to fill that empty space, that's an illusion. It doesn't change anything. So that's the first gift of the wisdom of the insider, is that there's no more there. They have that statement in Buddhism. There is not really there. There's a statement, we have the grass is always greener on the other side. That insider group, what is it? You would probably know the Groucho Marx statement. I would never want to be, what is it?
I would never want to be in a club that would have me as a member.
Yeah, exactly. That's what that is. That's what the insider world is. You think you're just grasping because they have something I don't have. And it could be anything. It could be money. They have relationships. They have something that I don't have. But there is another aspect of it, which is there is a power to being part of the inside group. That's the other thing, because people want it. So now you have something that other people want. And so you can use that for good, or you can use it for bad. And I think a lot of people who more resonate with the outsider perspective tend to think, well, it's all bad. And that's why I'm grateful, because as I said, I think I've always sort of gravitated towards the outsider perspective. And my brother George would probably be the opposite. I think he always just assumed wherever he was the insider world. I don't think he had any idea, like, why wouldn't I be the center of the universe? But he always wanted to do it to make the world a better place. He said, I don't believe in standing outside of something and complaining about go inside the institution, go inside the organization and change it from within. And that's how he has led his life. He went off, started small and grew, and now he's the head of DC Water, changing the whole water infrastructure system. Thousands upon thousands of people are involved. They all have their role to play in creating. We now know with Flint, Michigan, they're just an example of all these water systems that are over 100 years old. They all cost $1 billion. But he caught it and had this vision of what was possible, and through being part of an institution, not outside of the institution, is changing it and has committed to it. So there is a way to work within a system, within the insider world, to make the world a better place. So we have to remember that. Being an insider does not make someone necessarily evil. It's what they do with that information. And what I also think is that there always will be insiders and outsiders. It's funny that I use this time. I just thought of it. The insider-outsider. My dad told me a story when he was at Andover. He was part of the outsider group, and there was an insider group. And he said, we realized there were more of us than them, so we overthrew them. We had a revolution. But then they become the insider group. But it's funny, when you look at the yearbook, they look exactly the same. You could never figure out who was the insider. I mean, there was no diversity. But he said years later, when they were in their 70s and at a reunion, they still talked about that big revolution of the outsiders overtaking the insiders. So there'll always be an insider. Even if the outsiders take in, then they become the insider. So I think this dynamic, it's important. This is why we want to see that there's a wisdom, and all of it can be used for good if we're conscious and awake. So if you work within a system, it's to work within a system to make it better. But sometimes you just don't feel like you're part of the system. And I think that's really what the feminine face of God is about for many people. Many people felt they didn't feel included in a much more patriarchal system. So that reading today from Andrew Harvey, it was in response to a woman who had been doing a lot of Buddhism and talking about the way she'd been treated as a woman, and how much different it was for a woman going through traditional Buddhist training than it was for a man. I love to tell the story of my friend who went to a Buddhist monastery in Korea and lived there, and all the robes were all gray. And this is a woman. And she's like, come on, I gotta at least paint my toenails. I need some color. I can't do this whole gray thing. And ultimately she couldn't stay because it was so repressive of her feminine energy. But so much of the religious teachings in the past have been so masculine oriented. Not bad to be part of that group, but to say there's also something missing. And that's the gift that the outsider gives us. The outsider has a freedom that you don't have sometimes when you're on the inside. Or you can see things that you can't see when you're on the inside. You see things that weren't working. You see things that don't include everybody, that are exclusive. There can be an inherent, I don't want to say necessarily, an inherent exclusivity in the inside group. It's limited to a certain amount of people. And to be the outsider, you start to say, well, this doesn't always work for everybody. This doesn't work for the whole world. And we start examining it. It also gives us a lot of freedom to try different things. Man, I have so many stories in my head. I just like, which one do I go? Because this is I think it's fascinating. I wanted to use an example. I talk a lot about Yogananda and Shunryu Suzuki. Yogananda would be the example of coming in through the front door. Here's what Hinduism teaches, and he went around the country and he talked with, every time he talked, thousands of people were there listening. He went and visited the President of the United States and, just all the big names. He was through the front door. Shunryu Suzuki, exact opposite. He came here and nobody knew he was coming. He's just like this little Zen monk. He just came to take on a little temple and wasn't preaching to anyone. He was happy. His wife was saying, why do you prepare talks for 4 people like you're going to have 10 people? And like for him, 10 people was a lot of people to come because he normally got like 4 or 5. And so the whole 100 people, I don't know if he ever talked to 100 people at once when he was here, and he certainly didn't go around talking to. He just wanted people to practice. He had this very gentle ways through the back door. But he's impacted easily as many people as Yogananda has. But he had this freedom to find his way in America that was very different. He always talks about shining your corner of the world. Just do your own thing. So I love that example because they were both valuable, but they have a different way of going about it, and they're equally powerful. And I think what I really want to say with this divine feminine, with the outsider perspective, is that there is a power to it, but it's not as visible as the masculine energy, but it is actually impacting the world as deeply and profoundly as anything coming in the front door. And you have the freedom to make mistakes, and you have the freedom to try different things. I've always been grateful that in some way, being the fourth child, you know how parents are much more strict with their oldest children? And by the fourth one, they're just like, whatever. So I had a lot of that, and I feel so grateful. I was sort of outside of their purview, and so I could do all this stuff that none of my brothers could because they were much more. I want to say, I don't mean this in the negative sense, but they were indoctrinated. They had more of my parents' influence on them, where I was a little bit freer from all that influence. It wasn't right on top of me. I got to have my own thoughts and my own space. And that's what happens when you're an outsider. You start thinking more for yourself. You find your own voice. It's less conforming in many ways. The prophets of the Old Testament were always outsiders. They were not the kings and the queens and the army leaders. They were the people sort of outside the system, seeing what needs to be seen. I have an artist friend. He said that's the whole role of artists. The artists are not supposed to be part of the business. They're not supposed to be part of mainstream culture. They're supposed to stay outside of it and comment on it, see what they see it from an outside perspective. And that's the wisdom of the outsider. So whenever we find ourselves in that outsider role, to recognize that there's a power in it, even though we can't see it. Really quickly, I've been watching Game of Thrones, which I'm embarrassed to say because it's really violent and really bloody, and I never was drawn to it. I, of myself, would have never watched it, but so many people were talking about it to the point I like to know what people are. I'm like, why is this taking over the culture so much? So I watch it, but I sort of fast forward, so I don't fully get the details, but I get the main essence of it. But what's interesting is there's two characters, so it's been 6 seasons now. There's two characters, they're kids, and they continually show their journey, but they're not impacting the story at all. One's going off and getting trained with some sort of shapeshifter warrior dude. The other guy's a handicap, and he's having all these visions. They're showing him all these visions. So in essence, like being a prophet. And what's interesting is for 6 seasons now, which is 6 years, they continue to show their story, but their stories have nothing to do. They don't move the plot along. They don't interact with any of the other characters. They're not any part of the kings and queens. They're just doing their own thing, but they're so clear to show you. Even though it's been 6 years, they're getting developed. They're nurturing their different perspective, this bigger perspective that not everyone involved in the game who is participating can't see it because they're so involved in the game. They're getting all this visionary training for years now. So I know eventually, I don't know the story, I've never read the books, I don't know anyone, I haven't asked. But my sense is they wouldn't show them for 6 years, their training, if they weren't going to have at some point an impact on the plot, on everybody else's life. But right now they are completely invisible to the story and to the characters. Invisible. But the author, which we could say is a divine intelligence, knows that they are essential to the story. And so for me, that's the part of the outsider perspective, is that if you feel more connected with the outsider perspective, and you must if you're here, that there's a wisdom to be gained there that you can't gain from being on the insider perspective. And I want to bring up one last point. Oh, I'm doing good for time. I've been speaking really fast because I was afraid I was going to run out of time. Okay. And this is sort of leading into our theme for June is vision. I've been contemplating. So first of all, let me just own to the fact that I've had a little bit of jealousy of my brother George. And the jealousy has been, I had to really think about what it was. And the jealousy was that what he's working on is a project that is very clearly defined, Everyone knows what they're doing. Thousands of people are part of it. Everybody knows their role, and they're participating. So it's everyone. It's not just him. It's thousands of people, and everyone's playing their role to create this thing that's going to make the world a better place. It's so easily defined and clear, and it has an endpoint. The spiritual journey is a lot more vague, very undefined, and it doesn't have an endpoint. So it's felt like, wow, it would be so much easier if you just had something really clear and definitive to work on. And there's another aspect about this. I've said I felt like an insider twice in my life. The other time was when I worked at Agape. I wasn't aware of it. I didn't think of it in that terms at first. I already had the call to be a minister, so I wanted to work in a church to get experience. But it was actually one of my classmates who said it to me. She came up to me and she said, she was doing a lot of inner work, and that's about being honest, and she was sharing with me from a safe and honest place, so I honor her. It was a new awareness for me. She said she was envious of me because I was on the insider track, that now I was part of the inner world at Agape and she wasn't. And I remember being so shocked because I hadn't looked at it from that perspective before, and I hadn't taken the job for that reason. But then I became more conscious, that's true. I never have to wait in lines. I keys to everything. I could go where I want. But I'm like, well, it does bring, it wasn't just Agape. Agape was still part of Centers for Spiritual Living, whose home office was in LA at the time. I knew all those people in home office. I was in charge of getting all the ministers to teach for the ministerial classes, which was for all of CSL, as well as the classes at Agape. I was part of that team. And so I knew all the ministers in the LA area, and we had a satellite campus in Santa Rosa at the time, so I knew the ministers up here. Knew all the people at home office. So I was like in the middle of everything, and I was like, this is cool. But it was interesting at the same. Well, I'll get there. So, and the other thing about being at Agape, as you know, Reverend Michael knows a lot of the people in the spiritual celebrity world. So they would come and speak. He mostly tries to speak on most Sundays, but often he can't. So they'd wander into our office, and I get to hear their stories. And I just love stories, so I was happy. I love hearing their stories, and there's experience there. They've been doing this for a long time, so I got to hear their stories and their experience. But I never was in awe, like, oh, they have truth, or now I'm closer to truth than I was before. And I think when I left Agape in 2000, I left not longing for that experience anymore, because I had it. Again, it was sort of that feeling of there was no there. I mean, I wasn't any closer to the divine because I had been in this vortex of celebrity in some way, spiritual celebrity. And then I became a pulpit minister, and Reverend Michael came out, and Ricky and Nirvana, and it was great. They did a talk on Thursday night. People from the East Coast, all these different states. People I had no idea who they were. And they came Thursday night. Friday, we had prayer circles around the Capitol building. It was great. So pray for peace for the entire world. And then Ricky and Jack co-led music, peace music. We're all in the Capitol lawn doing this, being our hippie selves. And then the installation was that night. And so there, and people have still tell me, oh, I was at your installation. I have no idea who they were. But it wasn't me. It was Reverend Michael that was bringing in all these people, and Ricky and Nirvana. And so even then, the vortex of sort of spiritual celebrity continued. And I had spent all these years in school writing a million papers, so I had a lot to say at first. I was like, blah, 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 blah. And I was telling some people, about a year and a half into it, I'm like, yeah, I have nothing else to say, I'm done. It was like 3 years of my training all blurted out, now I'm done. But what happened then was once I got all the initial stuff out, I realized I don't even know if I believe all this stuff. There's a lot of problems I'm having with it. I actually was having those problems even at Agape. And so ultimately what I had to do is extricate myself from that world. I pulled myself completely out of it because I realized I can't teach it anymore. I don't even know if I think it's real or true. I can't get up there and speak something that I'm not sure I'm in alignment with. It sounds really good, and you have great music and open the heart and all this stuff is great, but I don't know if it's true, and I don't know if I can stay up there and stand for it. So I went from being totally in the middle of everything to now, most people, well, they know who I am, but I'm not in the center of everything. I've pulled myself completely on the outside. And it's been the greatest gift. I would never go back in because I identify with the outsider. No. But I had to find my own voice. I had to find my own unique way of saying things. I had to find what I believed for myself. And I think one of the things that's in, and as I was contemplating this about the spiritual journey, which makes it challenging, is I think we all have that seeking energy. We're seeking. That's why we're on this journey. We know there's something more. We've experienced it. We may have had mystical experiences or intuition or feeling. We know that there's something greater than ourselves. So we're constantly seeking to become it. But to me, that's almost what drives the spiritual economy, which is all these people then say, well, I love God, I love my life, and now I want to be a teacher of it. So we have thousands of teachers who are finding a way to market their particular, I'll help you find your purpose, 3 steps to finding your highest life meaning, I don't know, whatever, prosperity, relationships, health, everything. And I think because I've been in it so long, I've just been inundated with for so long that I got turned off. Somewhere along the line, I'm tired of this. I'm tired of the constant marketing of spirituality with the intention that you don't know and I know. Your lack, your spiritual seeking, and I can fill your spiritual seeking. I need you to feel lack. I don't mean me personally. But I think can be some of the idea, which is, well, that gets into the vision next week. So, but I think that can be a danger of the inside world is I'm not sure there's even a realization. I don't think a lot of these spiritual teachers have bad or mean. I don't think they have ugly agendas. I don't think they're trying to manipulate. I don't think any of this is operating from like power-hungry people. I think it's people who are operating from a deep and genuine desire to wake people up. But the way they do that is they need you to feel not enough. They need to tap into the spiritual seeker that we all have. And if we're infinite beings, we will have for the rest of our lives. We will never stop being spiritual seekers, so that's an easy energy to tap into. And we're easy targets in some way. So here's one perspective I would like to say. We're going to go into the visions. If that's the case, what does that mean for us in our community? And what is there anything that's different? What's different of how we can do things? Not always from a sense of lack. But today I want to end with the realization that, I have a colleague who wrote a book, The Grass is Greener Right Here and Right Now, right where we are. That yes, we have a part of us because we are infinite beings that will always be seeking, I think, will always be wanting to grow. At least that has been my experience. I can't speak for all eternity, but thus far there's always a part of us that is seeking and wanting to learn and to grow, and that's fun. We do it for joy. But there's also a part of us that already has it right now. So I want my invitation for this week, as we step into the month of June, which is all about vision, about where we're growing into, prior to that, for the next 2 weeks, I want you to think of where you already are, that there's a part of you that's already arrived. You've already arrived wherever, and I don't mean just here in this spot, I mean in your life, on your spiritual journey, you have arrived. And I want you to spend some time in that energy of what that feels like to have already arrived at a certain place in your life, that you are exactly where you need to be. You don't need to be anywhere else. You don't need to be, for a part of you doesn't need anything else, that just where you are in this moment, you have arrived. You're here. So the idea is just like I was talking about with George with his project, there's an end date, there's a finish date. And there's something appealing to that, about that. Like, oh, I've completed, now I can go on to another project. It's not that you don't have other projects, but I've completed one project. I want you to find where in your life have you arrived? Where are you in completion? Can you just say, I've arrived? Because a part of you has. Everybody has arrived. Everyone in this room. There's not a single person who hasn't arrived. So to really acknowledge that and nurture that, because we spend a lot of time nurturing that part of us that wants to grow, that we nurture this constant, where am I expanding to? Where's my next step? How am I growing? So I'm inviting us to do the divine feminine of nurturing that part that says we're all okay right now. I have a colleague who always worked with children, and it was her pet peeve that we always refer to our children as our future. She said, no, children aren't just our future. They're our now. They're fully beautiful human beings right now. We don't have to wait for 10 years for them to really be special. They're special right now. That there's always this part of us in the spiritual world always pushing forward. Human world too. Right now, we have arrived. Let's pray. Let's pray from this moment, knowing that we have arrived in this moment. There is a part of us that does not need to seek anything more, that it has arrived. Not all of us, but a part of us. May we open our eyes and our ears and our heart to feel into this always already arrived state. Not just in the spiritual realm, but mentally, emotionally, and physically. In relationships, in our work life, in our financial life. On some level, in some way, we've already arrived at something. For the divine is never lost. The divine itself is not seeking, it already is. And it is always at peace in the isness of every moment. The wholeness and the perfection that is all life already sees and knows and nurtures and celebrates who we are right now, in this very moment. It dances in delight at how we are in this moment with all our imperfections mashed up together. It is beautiful and magnificent, every single one of us. That our imperfections are part of the beauty of the artwork that each of us are, the masterpiece of love and light and creativity and brilliance, this dance of the shadow and the light together as one. We are the divine now. The grass is green now, as each and every one of us. Now. Right now. Nowhere to go. Nothing to grasp after. Right now. Nothing to seek. For right now, we just allow ourselves to arrive in our body, in this place, in this time, now. And as we hold this for ourselves, we hold this for the entire planet. That everyone and every life form in this planet has arrived at some level. Whatever the journey is, in this moment there is an arrival. There is an isness. There is a wholeness even in the duality. There is a wholeness. We see and hold that for this entire planet, for all life on this planet. The arrival of heaven on earth now. In this moment, there is a heaven on earth that knows itself and sees itself and has arrived. We rest in that. We rest in that in this country as it goes through all of its machinations. Where there is a lot of fear of the future, we know there's a place that it has arrived right now. In our friends and beloved ones who may be going through challenges. And yet, even in the midst of those challenges, there is an arrival right here and right now. We let it all go and just enjoy our arrival into the wholeness and the perfection of this very moment. There's nothing else. And so I just say thank you. Thank you. Thank you. In peace, I just let this word be now. And with all of you, my brothers and sisters, we say as one. And so it is. Amen.
So it is. And so it is. And so it is.